Ever since the first FNAF book release, people have been using these stories as parallels. But as discussed in my latest theory video, you know how I really feel about the way people use parallels in this fanbase. But to summarize it for newcomers, parallels are narrative tools in a story that reinforce themes and elements from the story. They do this by repeating certain events or referencing certain mythology and folklore that reinforce the theme of the story. Take for example the narrative parallels that are commonly found between the main protagonist and the main antagonist. Most of the time, these two forces are two sides of the same coin, completely opposite goals but still similar to one another. But FNAF fans have mostly used the word parallel to mean stand-in. For example, Edwin is a parallel to Henry, meaning that Edwin is another universe version of Henry that exists in another continuity. But that's not exactly how parallels actually work, at all. Most of these comparisons are made by using surface level similarities, somehow using that as evidence that both characters can't coexist. But if you want to hear me ramble about that topic, I recommend you to check out my previous video on this topic. But what if we switch things up for once? What if we analyze one of these stories from the FNAF books from an actual narrative standpoint instead of a lore standpoint? Let's not try to find the hidden secrets that hide deep inside the pages of these books. Let's take a step back and treat this short story, well, as a story for once. And what better story to pick than Into the Pit? Only is it FNAF's first short story, it's also a story that's currently being adapted into a game. So before we dive into the game that releases this August, why not go back to the origin of his story and look at what the narrative itself is about. So let's dive into the pit together and see what the story really is about. So, what the heck is Into the Pit even about? If you're someone that hasn't read the books, you probably heard a lot of weird things floating around, like time-traveling ball pits and an evil organic spring Bonnie replacing someone's dad. But don't worry, things always seem worse when your only source is a second-hand retelling. To try and explain parallels, I think it's best I summarize the story first myself. Afterwards, we'll dive into the parallels. If you don't want a long, detailed summary of this story, jump to the timestamp that appears on screen right now. For the people that stayed for the summary, let's open the book and dive into the story. The story opens up with the plot introducing us to our main character, Oswald. Oswald's father is currently bringing him to school. It's the final day before summer vacation. During the drive to school, Oswald sees a dead possum on the road. The possum strangely reminds him of his current living situation. The dead possum is still here. Oswald was looking out the passenger's window at the grey, furry corpse on the side of the road. Somehow, it looked even deader than it had yesterday. Last night's rain hadn't helped. "Nothing looks deader than a dead possum," Oswald's dad said. "Except this town," Oswald mumbled, looking at the boarded up storefronts and the display windows, which were displaying nothing but dust. 3 years ago, the town where Oswald lives was thriving. Back when Oswald was 7 years old, and the town was full of stores and entertainment venues. But that ended once the mill closed. The mill was the main income of the town, so once it closed, a lot of businesses closed with it. Even Oswald's dad lost his job because of it, since he used to work at the mill himself. The closing of the mill led to a lot of people also moving out of town to find work elsewhere. This includes the family of Oswald's best friend, Ben. Oswald, however, didn't move. His mom had a steady job at the hospital they didn't want to risk losing, and they also didn't want to risk moving too far away from Grandma in case she needed their help. Once he's at school, things don't go much better for him. Most teachers are not bothering to teach them anything on the last day, just making them watch a movie instead. Meanwhile, Oswald hears everyone talking about their plans this summer, how they will leave on vacation or go visit their family. Oswald knows he won't be doing anything like that. He's still stuck in this dead town. The next day, his father suggests that during the summer he can bring Oswald to the library every morning to spend time while he's at work. He doesn't want his son to be doing nothing all day long. Afterwards, he would pick him up at Jeff's Pizza. Oswald is suddenly reminded of Jeff's Pizza, and how like the rest of the town, the location is pretty dead itself. Jeff's Pizza was kind of weird. It wasn't dirty exactly, but it was run down. The vinyl on the booth seats had been repaired with duct tape. It was clear that Jeff's Pizza used to be something bigger and better than it now was. There were tons of unused floor space and lots of unused electrical outlets along the base of the walls. Also on the far wall was a small stage, even though there were no performances there, not even so much as a karaoke night. It was a strange place, sad and not what it had once been, like the rest of the town. The next day, his father brings him to the library, and his first day goes pretty well. Oswald uses the computer to the library. He reads some fun books, and once he gets hungry, he walks over to Jeff's Pizza. The owner of the location, Jeff, even gives him an extra leftover slice for free. To Oswald, it's a sign that the summer may not be as bad as he expected. Maybe his future will be brighter. But during his stay at the pizzeria, he also realizes how old the place really looks. Like something else used to be here. But while he looks around, he also sees it for the first time. It was a large rectangular pen surrounded by yellow netting, but it had been roped off with a sign that said, "Do not use." The pen itself was filled with red, blue, and green plastic balls that had probably been brightly colored once, but now they were faded and fuzzy with dust. Not much later, his dad picks him up at Jeff's Pizza and takes him home. The next few weeks are pretty fun for Oswald, but the longer the summer goes on, the more boring every day becomes. The free games he plays online won't let him process anymore unless he pays for it. The book series he's reading doesn't have the newest volume available, and Oswald starts to slowly realize how lonely he really is. But he doesn't have time to be sad. It's family fun evening, so he finally has time to spend some quality time with his family. Every family evening, the family watches a movie together. The movie they're watching that night is specifically a remake of an old science fiction movie. But after the movie ends, Oswald and his dad start a small argument about the movie. Once the movie was over, Dad said, "Well, that was pretty good, but not as good as the real version." "What do you mean, the real version?" Oswald said. "That was a real version." "Not really," Dad said. "I mean, it was set in the same universe as the real version, but it was kind of a cheap knockoff of the one that came out when I was a kid." Dad always had to be so opinionated. He could never just watch something and enjoy it. "So, the best movies are always the ones you watched when you were a child," Oswald said. "Not always, but in this case, yes." "But the special effects in the original version stink," Oswald said. "All those puppets and rubber masks." "I'll take a puppet or a model over CGI any day," Dad said, leaning back on the couch and propping his feet on the coffee table. "That stuff is slick and fake. It's got no warmth, no texture." Before I continue, I recommend keeping the scene in the back of your mind. Because, well, it's a surprise tool that will help us later. Later that evening, Oswald has a conversation with his friend Ben on the phone. Ben tells him about his vacation at Myrtle Beach. Oswald says he misses him, how he wishes he could be there. Once Oswald tells him about his own summer, Ben just feels bad for him and tells him, "I'm sorry." This conversation is the breaking point for Oswald. The next day, he is very angry. Like, very angry. He's finally fed up with his living situation, so when his dad brings him to the library that morning, Oswald lashes out at him, showing how upset he is about his life situation. His dad feels bad about it, but tells them they're doing the best they can in the situation they're currently in. Later that evening, when his dad wants to pick him up at Jeff's Pizza, he wants to take revenge on his father. He's angry and upset at his dad. He thinks he may give him a good scare if he hides somewhere in the pizzeria. Somewhere his father can't find him. He looks around, but the only hiding place he can find is the ball pit. Oswald crawls into the pit, waiting for his dad to enter the pizzeria to look for him. But nothing happens, at least for a few minutes. Suddenly Oswald hears a bunch of weird noises around him, and out of curiosity, he sticks his head out of the pit again. As he rose, his ears were assaulted by the sound of beeping electronics and yelling and laughing kids. It took a few seconds for his eyes to adjust from the darkness in the pit to the brightness that now surrounded him, the flashing lights and vivid colors. He looked around and muttered, "Toto, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore." Oswald realizes he ended up in some kind of different version of Jeff's Pizza. Everything is suddenly colorful, the walls covered in arcade machines, and the place is suddenly filled up with kids that wear outfits from a different time period. He also notices the once empty stage is suddenly filled with 3 colorful animatronics: a bear, a rabbit, and a yellow chick. the characters from the faded murals in Jeff's Pizza. Even the ball pit he crawled out of looked shiny and new compared to the creepy one in Jeff's Pizza. He sees a calendar hanging on the wall, saying the year he ended up in is 1985. Oswald quickly becomes friends with two kids that are hanging out in this old version of the pizzeria. The kids, Mike and Chip, invite him for a few rounds of skee ball. While playing the game, Oswald notices it for the first time. Roaming around the pizzeria was the yellow version of the rabbit on stage. Oswald assumes it's a guy in a suit entertaining the kids, but no one seems to notice the rabbit apart from him. Since everyone else is ignoring the rabbit, he chooses to do the exact same. After playing some games, Oswald tries to go back home by crawling back into the pit. And once he dives back into it and comes back up, he realizes that he's back at Jeff's Pizza. He also notices he only got a message from his dad right now, even though he was in the ball pit for multiple hours. It's like time in the ball pit world worked differently than in his world. The week afterwards, Oswald takes full advantage of the new world he discovered. Every day he goes to Jeff's Pizza early just to sneak into the ball pit and spend all day in Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. He has the time of his life, finally having the adventure he craved for, even if some strange things happen in this world, like that yellow rabbit staring at him sometimes, and fast coins appearing in his pockets after realizing he has no money for the arcades. But one day he goes back into the pit, and something is different. People in the pizzeria are screaming, kids and parents are running out of the building, and then Oswald sees it, the yellow rabbit. In front of him stood the man in the yellow bunny costume. If it was a man under there. The bunny opened the door that said private and went inside. Oswald followed. The corridor was long and dark. The rabbit looked at him with blank eyes and an unchanging grin, then walked farther down the hall. Oswald wasn't chasing the rabbit. He was letting the rabbit lead him, as if he were in a terrifying version of Alice in Wonderland, going down the rabbit hole. The rabbit stopped in front of a door with a sign reading Party Room, and beckoned for Oswald to come inside. Oswald was shaking with terror, but he was too curious to refuse. Besides, he kept thinking, "You can't hurt me, I haven't even been born." Once inside the room, it took Oswald a few seconds to register what he was actually seeing, and a few more seconds for his brain to process it. They were lined up against the wall, which was painted with images of the place's mascots. Half a dozen kids, none of them older than Oswald, their lifeless bodies propped into sitting positions. Their legs stretched out in front of them. Some of them had their eyes closed as if asleep, others' eyes were open, frozen in an empty doll-like stare. They were all wearing Freddy Fazbear birthday party hats. Oswald couldn't tell how they had died, but he knew the rabbit was responsible for it, that the rabbit had wanted him to see his handwork. Oswald runs away with the yellow rabbit chasing him, but once he's back in Jeff's Pizza, he isn't safe. For some reason, time wasn't frozen this time. His dad was already in the pizzeria looking for him. But before his dad can scold him for going into the stinky old ball pit, the yellow rabbit's arm comes outside of the pit and pulls Oswald's dad into it. Before Oswald can do anything, the yellow rabbit steps out of the pit, straightens his bow tie, and takes Oswald by the arm, dragging him to the car. Oswald is overwhelmed, confused even. Why was nobody responding to the yellow rabbit kidnapping him? The yellow rabbit steps into the car and drives Oswald back home. Everyone around Oswald acts like this is normal. It's like they think the yellow rabbit is his father. Even his mother doesn't seem confused by the yellow rabbit now living in their house. The only one that shows any concern is Jinx, Oswald's cat. She hides away from the yellow thing and hisses at it every chance it gets. During the first day of school, Oswald gets a ride to school from the yellow rabbit. He slowly starts to realize what happened yesterday may not have been just a nightmare. Once at school, Oswald meets a new student named Gabriella, who's reading a book about Greek mythology. Gabriella explains that the book is a comfort book to her, that she reads it when she needs to be brave. A book she especially needs now after she moved into Oswald's town 3 days ago. I've basically read this book a dozen times. It's like a comfort book for me. I read it when I need to be brave. The word brave struck a chord in Oswald. Brave is what he needed to be. Why is that? Well, the Greek heroes are super brave. They're always doing battles with some kind of big monster, like a minotaur or a hydra. It kind of puts things in perspective, you know? No matter how bad my problems are, at least I don't have to battle with a monster. Yeah, Oswald said, even though he was trying to figure out how to do a battle with a monster, a yellow one, long-eared monster, in his own home. His conversation with Gabriella is a wake-up call to Oswald. He realizes he needs to be brave in this situation just like the Greek heroes. So later that evening, once the yellow thing goes to sleep, Oswald sneaks out of his house and runs towards Jeff's pizza. Once he's there, he's glad the pizzeria is still open. He quickly asks for a soda from Jeff himself and then dives into the ball pit. He tries to count to 100 and enter the 1985 version of the pizzeria. But this time, nothing happens. The only thing Oswald notices is something feeling strange under his shoes. Oswald quickly realizes it's his dad's body that's still inside the ball pit. So he tries as hard as he can to pull his dad out of the pit. With all his power, Oswald is able to get his dad out of the ball pit. But while he's wondering how he'll get dad home safely, something else enters the pizzeria. He felt it before he saw it, the presence behind him, the awareness of something in his personal space. Before he could turn around, a pair of furry yellow arms locked around him in a fearsome embrace. He got his right arm free enough to jab his elbow into the yellow thing's midsection. He got loose, but the thing was blocking the exit to the pit. He couldn't get out of the pit by himself, let alone with his poor passed out father. He headbutted the yellow thing and knocked it into the ropes and netting that surrounded the ball pit. It stumbled a little, righted itself, and then, arms outstretched, lunged towards Oswald. It pushed Oswald against the wall of the pit. Its eyes dead as always. It unhinged its jaws to reveal a double row of fangs as sharp as scimitars. Mouth open, freakishly wide, it lunged for Oswald's throat, but he blocked it with his arm. Pain pierced through Oswald's forearm as the yellow thing pierced its fangs into his skin. Oswald fell headfirst into the surface. Grateful that the bottom of the pit was soft. His arm was throbbing, his whole body was exhausted, but he had to get up. He had to save his dad, like those ancient Greek heroes Gabriella had told him about. He had to be brave and face the monster. Oswald rose unsteadily to his feet. Somehow, when he shook Oswald off, the yellow thing must have gotten tangled into the ropes and netting that lined up in the ball pit. A rope was looped around its neck, and was grasping the rope with its big paws, trying to free itself. Oswald couldn't understand why it was failing to free itself until he saw the yellow thing's feet weren't touching the floor of the pit. The yellow thing was suspended from the rope, which was tied securely to a metal rod at the top of the ball pit. The rabbit had hanged itself. The yellow thing keeps struggling for a while, but Oswald isn't planning to save it. The creature screams and gasps for air without making any sound, before it dies. But once it dies, all that's left is an empty rabbit costume, hung on the netting of the ball pit. Meanwhile, Oswald's dad finally wakes up, not realizing what just happened. Oswald lies to him about what happened, and apologizes for being such a difficult child sometimes. His dad forgives him, and together they walk home while Jeff yells at Oswald because he forgot his soda. So, after that long detailed summary, we finally got to the part of the video where we will actually discuss the meaning and parallels of the story. For people that skip the summary, if anything I mention is strange, I do recommend watching the summary part of the video, since I mention, reinforce and quote specific important scenes that will be discussed in this part of the video. First, let's look at the main players of our story. Most importantly, our protagonist Oswald. Oswald is a young boy who lives in a town that died 3 years ago when the mill closed. And Oswald, 3 years later, still struggles to deal with this reality. Oswald is attached to the past. Every time he does something fun with his family, he compares it to how much more fun it was in the past, when there was more things to do in the town. He resents the town for dying, since it led to his mom being more busy to be able to pay rent, his dad having to switch jobs, all the fun places closing down, and most importantly, his best friend Ben moving. The present is Oswald's biggest enemy. This element of dying and change is also present in the main setting of the story, Jeff's Pizza. Jeff's Pizza is basically a personification of the dead town, even though Jeff's Pizza seemed to be dead long before the mill even closed. It's the main setting of the story because it ties into Oswald's frustrations. Like the town, it's something that used to be better in the past, and it still has remnants of that past in every corner of the building. Like an empty stage where no one performs, and hidden murals behind the painted walls. And this frustration of the past finally leads directly into the main focus point of the story, the ball pit. Oswald somehow discovers an entrance to the past by hiding inside the ball pit, a past that was better in his eyes. Oswald finally gets to spend his time in a superior version of Jeff's Pizza, a version that isn't dead like the town he lives in. But a lot of people, when talking about the story, are confused by the existence of the ball pit. Is it real time travel? Is it a dream? Or is this a twisted memory? If you read between the lines, the story of Into the Pit already answers this question. Do you remember that one scene I called out in the summary section? The scene I called out would be important. Well, here it is. The scene is a discussion between Oswald and his father after watching a remake of a movie. Oswald's dad said the movie wasn't bad, but isn't the real version of the movie. Oswald questions what his dad means by this. Oswald's dad clarifies that even though both the old movie and the new rebooted version of the movie take place in the same continuity, the new one is cheap and fake, while the old version is the real version. This conversation directly sets up to the audience what the Ball Pit world actually is. It's a fake remake. It's a glorified reboot of what really happened in the past. The missing children incident we see take place in this Ball Pit world isn't a real incident, but that doesn't mean it isn't real at all. Both what Oswald experiences in the Ball Pit and the real event of the missing children in 1985 happened in this story's continuity. Both events coexist in the same continuity. But the one Oswald experienced is a fake version of it, a remake. That's also why this version seems more over the top than what we assumed about the incident in the past FNAF games. But most importantly, it also explains the main antagonist of the story, the yellow thing, or how most of us call it, Into the Pit Spring Bonnie. If Into the Pit depicted real time travel, normally Oswald would have seen William Afton himself lure the kids into the back room and kill them. But in this version of 1985, the yellow rabbit isn't a guy in a suit, but a full-blown monster. A yellow rabbit with razor-sharp fangs. The appearance of Into the Pit Spring Bonnie is funnily enough also set up in the same conversation Oswald had with his father. Oswald comments on how the old movie was cheap looking and was bad because it used bad practical effects.
A lot. It's only a model. Shh.
Oswald's dad replies that he prefers puppets over bad CGI any day. And besides, the old Sandralic movies Oswald watches are also just a guy in a suit. A guy in a suit. A guy in a suit is exactly what the real incident was about. Nothing more than a guy in a yellow rabbit suit killing multiple children. But the fake remake version of this memory seems to directly parallel the CGI in modern remakes of movies. That's why the yellow thing is depicted as a giant monster with realistic flesh and fangs. It's like he's an exaggerated CGI remake of the rabbit mascot that killed these kids. And that's what Into the Pit Spring Bonnie really is. A personification of what really happened. A twisted memory of what really went down in 1985. And that's why he is a perfect antagonist to our protagonist Oswald. A boy that glorifies the past is forced to go against a bad memory of the past. But Oswald is able to change his mindset thanks to Gabriella, who taught him that our personal issues are nothing compared to the Greek heroes who constantly have to fight against giant monsters. And Oswald agrees, because his past complaints about his current living situation is nothing compared to the monster he's fighting right now, a monster from the past. But apart from the main antagonist, there's also way more evidence in the story itself that implies the Ball Pit actually isn't real time travel. FNAF's short stories often reference other stories, like fairy tales and Greek mythology. So does Into the Pit. When Oswald follows the yellow rabbit, he compares himself to Alice following the white rabbit in Alice in Wonderland. And we all know what Alice in Wonderland is about. It's about a girl following a white rabbit and ending up in a magical world named Wonderland. But in the end of the story, it's revealed that Wonderland was nothing more than a dream. A very similar story is also mentioned multiple times in Into the Pit, and that's The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Not only is Oswald nicknamed Oz multiple times in the story, Oswald also references the line, "Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore," once he enters the 1985 version of Jeff's Pizza. But the original book of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz is kind of a different case than Alice in Wonderland. Unlike Wonderland, Oz is pretty much depicted to be a real place in the original book by L. Frank Baum. The story even explains that no one's entered Oz before because there is a giant desert surrounding it, separating the magical land from the rest of the world. But this doesn't matter when you realize that Oswald specifically referenced a line that originates from the 1939 movie adaptation of the story. And in this version of the story, the Land of Oz is in the end also revealed to just be a dream. Both of these references imply that the ball pit world is nothing more than a dream, something that happens in Oswald's mind. Oswald simply falls asleep when he goes into the ball pit. This is also further reinforced by the fact that when Oswald tries to save his dad in the ball pit, he doesn't have to travel back to 1985 to find him, but he simply finds his dad sleeping inside of the ball pit. But what exactly causes these dreams in the first place? That question gets explained later in the Fazbear Frights book series, where the ball pit plays a major role in the Situate Stingers. To summarize a long story short, a detective named Larson gets infected by agony from the Afton amalgamation, which is powered by a creature named Eleanor. Eleanor also originates from the ball pit, or is at least heavily tied to it. But we're not getting into Eleanor today. She deserves a whole video of her own. Once Larson is infected with his agony, he starts to get visions and dreams about the ball pit. When he falls asleep, he has dreams of kids playing in this ball pit and diving into it, leading him into trying to look for the real ball pit, which he later discovers contains the blood of multiple victims Eleanor killed. Later in Epilogue 10, Larson tries to face Eleanor, but once he sees her, he faints and ends up in the ball pit world again. Eleanor shows him multiple memories of past stories, showing how she influenced the events of why these stories even happened in the first place. Later in Epilogue 11, Larson is still trapped in the ball pit world. He's chasing after Eleanor, trying to defeat her. And how does he find her? In every memory, he finds a version of Jeff's Pizza in a different time period. And every time, he has to dive back into the pit to find Eleanor in a different time period. The ball pit is seemingly the element that ties all these memories together. But this also confirms that the ball pit isn't a time-traveling device. Larson never goes into the real ball pit himself to go back into the past, but like Oswald and his dad, he falls asleep and is able to enter these memories because of the agony that resides in the ball pit, this agony also being inside of Eleanor. But then, we still are left with one issue. If the ball pit isn't real time travel, but instead memories, why aren't these memories we see in the ball pit world fully accurate to the actual events from the MCI? Well, that's where the second main character of the Singers comes into play, the Situate. The Situate is an endoskeleton possessed by two kids, Jake and Andrew. In the second half of the Stingers, only Jake is left in the Situate. Throughout the epilogues, Jake discovers a new power he gained from being a ghost. He's able to look into other people's memories, but is also able to modify and influence those memories. We see this in Epilogue 8, where Jake looks into the memories of a homeless man, learning how the man lost his family in a car accident. To help him, he makes the man focus on the good memories of his family. We see the same happen again in Epilogue 11, where Jake goes into the pit himself after defeating Eleanor. There he enters the memory of one of the victims of the ball pit, Millie from Count the Ways. We even know he's not really traveling back into time, because in the scene he appears as his human self instead of the Situate. He modifies Millie's memories by inserting himself into it and bring her back to her family's Christmas party, which didn't happen in the original story. So not only is Into the Pit not about time travel, it also sets up the future elements and world building that take place in the later stories of Frights, like setting up the fact that the supernatural and spirits are interconnected with memories. This is later also explored in the FNAF movie, where the ghost kids enter Mike's memories and even promise him to modify them. It also implies that whatever the yellow thing really was modified the memory of the ball pit himself. But Into the Pit also sets something else up with its themes. Oswald's difficulty of letting go of the past parallels another character in the epilogues, that character being Andrew. Andrew is an angry spirit that plays a big role in the epilogues, and the Man and Wolf 1280 short story. Similar to Oswald, he is unable to let go of his past, specifically of a person who killed him in the past. Everyone around Andrew already let go of this event in the Pizzeria Simulator fire, but while everyone was ready to let go of Afton, Andrew wasn't. Andrew made the choice to attach himself to Afton's spirit and keep him alive when he should have been dead, wanting him to suffer and to be tortured instead of letting him go. But similar to Oswald holding on to the past leading to Spring Bonnie causing chaos in his life, Andrew's actions lead to Afton getting a second chance at coming back. The narrative of Frights pretty much spells out what Andrew is doing isn't a good thing, because his actions is what leads into the rest of Frights. causing Afton to infect multiple items in the Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center, multiple innocent people to lose their life, and causing the rise of a new villain, Eleanor. And well, that's what Into the Pit really is about. A story of letting go, a story of how the past influenced the present, and a story about accepting change. Themes that all set up the Citrate Singers, but also continue the themes first set up in Pizzeria Simulator. This makes Frights a fitting epilogue to the events of Pizzeria Simulator. But hey, that's just my take. I would love to hear your guys' opinions on Into the Pit. Till next time, see you in the next video.